Have you ever met somebody who was not self-aware? It can be an awkward, difficult conversation. What do we mean by self-aware? Do you fully understand, particularly when we're talking about conflict, how you're either helping or hurting as you engage this conflict going on around you? But we live in a world where people aren't always self-aware. I remember one guy, he wanted to impress a girl really badly, thought she was beautiful, and so he grabs his guitar and he goes over to his house and he decides he's going to serenade her. He begins playing the guitar, and of course at first she's like, this is incredibly sweet. What a neat thing he's doing. But she noticed he was fumbling with some of the chords and having a little struggles here and there throughout the song. So she began to just make some suggestions. Hey, if you move your hand here, if you do this, if you do that, it might work out better. He goes, hey, listen, I've been playing guitar for 10 years. I know what I'm doing. All right. She lets him keep going, and finally she's like, can I borrow your guitar a second? And he's like, sure. And she grabs the guitar and she begins playing this beautiful Spanish tarantello, all the while reminding him that she's a professor down the street at the local music conservatory. Didn't have a whole lot of dates after that. Or the guy who goes to the meeting with a group of engineers, and it's several companies, several departments, they have to work together to do this large project, but there's one guy there who's just being argumentative. He's just testing everybody's patience. He's fighting about every little thing, but in particular, he keeps referring to an article. Hey, listen, if we just did things like this article, if you would all just read this article and do what this article says, we'd be fine. And one of the guys he's particularly making angry finally at some point looks up and he says, who wrote that article? And he looks down and states his name. Imagine how embarrassed he was when he realized that's who he was talking to here in the meeting. Many years ago, I owned a high-end AV company, and I remember sending out a salesperson on a sales call to people's house. And when he came back to that, I asked him how'd it go, and he says, oh man, I nailed it. We've got this thing in the bag, man. We're doing great. And what he didn't know is about 5 minutes before, they had called and said, please never ever send that person back to our house again. You see, sometimes we're not self-aware. Sometimes we don't understand how we might be contributing to the conflict because we don't see how we're the problem. In fact, I liked this quote from someone called Dr. Tasha, who wrote a book called Insight. And the quote said this: 95% of people believe they are self-aware. But in reality, only 10 to 15% actually merit the self-aware badge. Which means a whole bunch of us in this room need to work on self-awareness. I figured I was in the 10 to 15% until the worship leader at the Pleasant Hill campus said, what are you doing preaching this sermon? Yeah, we'll do her employee review here in the next week or so. So on that. Clearly, we all need to work on self-awareness, and we don't always understand how our lack of self-awareness contributes to conflict. We don't always see our bad habits and the things we do that end up making things worse at times. Now, when I think of self-awareness, I immediately think about something called Johari's window. It's something I'll talk about with the staff oftentimes or present to others. It's something as a church we have talked about before, but how many of you have learned that sometimes we have to hear things more than once for us to get it, right? Yeah. I'm that way as well. Johari's window is a useful tool when I'm talking to someone, especially maybe if they struggle a little bit with self-awareness, to help them kind of understand how people see them or how they see things, and maybe ask them, where do you see yourself fitting on this graph? And so when I think of Johari's window, immediately we build a graph, and it's got an X and Y plane on that. And I realize for a lot of you, I'm going to be triggering those bad feelings of high school right now, math on that, but hang with me on that. But it's got this X and Y plane that creates 4 quadrants. On those 4 quadrants, everything to the left on that, we'll say those are things known to self. In other words, these are things about me that I see about me. I recognize them. I know they're there. Things to the right, then, we talk about things that are not known to self. In other words, I don't see these things. They're not things that I recognize. Forgive my misspelled word there on the top, but as we move up on the graph, these are things that are known to others. In other words, other people see this about me. They recognize this about me. And as we move down on the graph, these are things that are not known to others. In other words, other people don't see these things in my life. This then is a useful tool to help us see different quadrants. And so when we go to the first quadrant, what we see is something I call an open quadrant. These are things I see about myself. These are things that you see about me, and so they're out in the open. We both know about them. They're clear as day on there, and they're just out there, you know. Could Pastor Jason use to lose a few pounds and get healthier? Absolutely. You see it. I saw it this morning in the mirror. I recognize it. I'm working about it. Leave me alone. And on that. But it's open. We know about it. It's there. It's not hiding, anything like that. Now, the second quadrant's where we start to run into some trouble. And this is particularly for those who struggle with self-awareness. The second area is what we call blind spots. And what we mean by that is these are things that other people see about us, but we don't always see about ourselves. See, you look at it and you're like, I can see what your problems are, Jason. I know exactly what your issues are, but I'm like, I don't see it. I don't know. I don't know that I agree with you on that. And blind spots can be a problem when we're in conflict because the person fails to own how they may be hurting in this conversation, or how some of their bad habits or some of the things they're doing could be escalating this conversation further rather than finding reconciliation within it. And a lot of us struggle with blind spots. This is the salesperson I sent out who thought they did a really good job, only to find out, no, that was not received well at all. Whatever you did at their house, please don't go back on that. Now, there's some traits I notice in people over time that struggle with blind spots. 5 symptoms, I call it, and I think these are important if you're kind of understand what blind spots are, or even maybe recognize what are some of the blind spots in my life, and do I struggle with any of these symptoms? The first symptom, as you can see, is this. People who struggle with blind spots don't listen, accept, or receive critical feedback. You know anybody like that in your life? If you don't, and the person next to you is looking at you, it's you, okay? Just FYI. Don't receive criticism well. Don't like to hear what's wrong. People who struggle with blind spots, they struggle in that area. The next one is they can't empathize with others because they don't understand how their bad behavior is contributing in a negative way to this conversation. So they can't always put themselves in the other person's mindset, what they're feeling, why they're feeling it. They can't walk that mile in their shoes. The third one is this: they have an inflated opinion of their contributions. This is the person who has a higher appraisal of their job performance than maybe you, their boss, do. You ever run into that one? They have a very high appraisal of how well they're doing in the organization. Or maybe you have a kid like that at home, or another relative. You know what? I think I'm doing a great job, but when they get around people and when you look at the data, you say, ooh, I don't know. I think you may have an elevated view of your abilities than what reality is telling us. That can be really difficult for somebody who struggles with blind spots because they think they're doing a great job. As a result, one we notice is that they are hurtful oftentimes without realizing it. Part of that's because they lack that empathy, but because they can't see, because these things are blind, they don't realize how their behaviors are hurting someone else. And so you find that their words can be cutting. You find that what they do is sometimes they just leave a trail of dead bodies behind them. Have you ever known somebody? They'll get the job done. They might even do it better than you, but they will leave a trail of dead bodies behind them in the process. You ever met somebody like that? And you have to be careful about that. Performance isn't everything, especially in the church where the single core idea is love in everything we do. The last one that we notice, the last symptom for people with blind spots, is they tend to take credit for successes and blame others for failures. I'm all in when things are going good, but it ain't my fault when it's not. That's someone else. That's not me. And ask yourself, do you struggle with any of these? Do any of these kind of hit home a little bit? Or do you know somebody? Do you work with somebody? Do you live with somebody that maybe struggles with some of these? They may struggle with blind spots. They may not fully see themselves in the mirror, what you see every single day. And the problem is, people with blind spots, this can be a real serious problem in conflict. Because again, they don't fully understand how they might be hurting the conversation. They don't understand what they're doing that might have a negative impact on what's going on. Quadrant 3, when we look into that one, we call these hidden things. These are things that are known to you, known to yourself, but not known to others, which means, guess what? You're hiding it. You're hiding it. See, this one can be a hard one too, because how many of you have learned that you can only hide things for so long? Anybody learned that in life? You can only hide things for so long. It's kind of like that water stain on your floor at the house. You can put a carpet on it if you want and hide it. You could put a piece of furniture over it so that nobody sees it. But how many of you know you'd better ask at least a couple good questions, which is, what caused it and has it been fixed? Because if you don't engage those questions, it doesn't matter if you put a piece of carpet over it. It doesn't matter if you put a piece of furniture on it. It's going to leak again, and it's going to cause more stains, and it's going to cause more problems, and it's only going to make the situation worse. You can't hide from your problems. But all too often, too, this is the group of people that like to wear a mask. They'll put a mask on. You know, I'm driving the right car, living in the right house, doing the right things. I'm the perfects. Me and the family are the perfects. But behind the scenes, their life's a mess. But it's about putting on appearances, isn't it? Problem is, you can only hide from those things for so long before they grow and they grow. And you eventually either A, have to deal with them, or B, clean up the mess when it explodes. And so the fourth one's kind of similar in many ways, but I call this one unknown. These are the things that you don't see in yourself and people don't necessarily see in you. The Bible refers to these things as the hidden places of the heart. The problem with these is they do inevitably make their way into your relationships. Any childhood issues, any hurts and pains, anything that's been unresolved and maybe we've just tucked away in our heart and ignored and over time it just kind of goes away. The problem is, though, particularly we see this in marriages all the time. You get married and there's that honeymoon period, but eventually all that unresolved stuff that's sitting there, that's never been dealt with, never been fixed, it eventually rears its ugly head in the marriage. Anyone ever noticed that? If not, I'll help you be a part of some of my appointments that come visit me. I'm guessing Don has a few that he can also show you. Again, just like quadrant 3, you can only hide for so long. And in this one, you're not hiding because the Bible would remind us of one very central truth. In Luke 8:17, it says, "For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought out into the open." Those are the words of Jesus Christ himself. You're not going to be able to hide from it on that. And so if I have to summarize real quick where we are in this series, which is a series about conflict and how to engage conflict in a healthy biblical way, there's 3 important takeaways we need to understand right now as we turn a corner. The first one is this: conflict often happens when there is a lack of self-awareness. I don't understand how I'm contributing to this problem. The second reason conflict happens is that there are different priorities. Now, we're not going to talk about this one this week. We're going to talk about this a little more in the next 2 weeks. Particularly, again, in marriages, this is where we have to engage this, and this is why we require pre-marriage counseling, because part of that pre-marriage counseling is for people to discuss their expectations. How many of you know that oftentimes people come into a marriage and they think they've got everything aligned, but when you start digging deeper into some of the other things like money, things like sex, things like whose family will we go visit for the holidays this year? That's always a fun conversation, right? Are our expectations aligned in this relationship? And when expectations aren't aligned, we have conflict that we have to deal with. The third one, conflict happens, is when there is a lack of trust. When trust has been eroded or is just gone. That's the one I want to hit on real quickly if we could. As we move into the Bible story I want us to talk about briefly today that exemplifies conflict, and we look at a healthy way in which to engage conflict. When I talk to the staff or a group of people about trust, I always tell them there's 3 important key ingredients to trust. And I encourage you to write these down on your worship guide or so forth, because these are important when we look at our story today, that I hope we see this story from a new lens, that maybe we've not seen it before. The three important key things to trust are this. The first one is safety. If you're going to build trust, you have to create a safe environment. That means that oftentimes it's a judgment-free, condemnation-free environment where people can feel free to share what they're struggling with, to talk about their failures, their issues. It's got to be a place where they feel like they can jump into that conversation and explore next steps. For trust to happen, people have to feel that they are in a safe place. For many of you, know with your kids, if you want them to be open and honest with you about what's going on, you have to create a safe environment where they feel okay to tell mom and dad anything they need to tell them in that. So creating a safe environment is important. It's not just with your kids, it's your marriage, it's your family, and your workplace. How can we do a better job creating a safe environment? And there's three key things here with safety we need to understand. In order for safety to happen, you have to be transparent, which means being open and honest about things. You have to share your heart. If you don't know the answer to something, you just need to admit it. You need to say, you know what, I don't know the answer to that. How about we go find the answer together? If you're wrong, admit you're wrong. But be transparent. The second is you have to model vulnerability in that relationship, which means you have to be able to let your guard down. You have to let the walls go down, put down your defenses. And the good news is, when you do that, you can begin to build trusting relationships with the people around you. And I will tell you this, in order for you to have genuine love, you have to have vulnerability. But now let me tell you the bad news. See, the good news is if you let down your guard, let down your defenses, you can have some really great conversations with somebody in a safe environment. But when you let down your guard and your defenses, you always run the risk of that other person hurting you. They do. I'll often tell the team and the board, I'll just say, even at church, I'll say this. Yes, we are shepherds and we watch the sheep, but something you need to remember, the sheep have teeth. See, true love requires that we let down our guard and that we be vulnerable. But in doing that, we also run the risk of them taking advantage of us and hurting us. But my dear friends, the most transparent, vulnerable person I ever know was Jesus Christ. And he showed us the greatest love of all. What did we do to him? We nailed him to a cross. We whipped him to within an inch of his life. We spit on him, mocked him, accused him. Be careful, though, of allowing yourself to go down roads of bitterness and cynicism if you want to build healthy, trusting relationships. Sometimes the sheep will bite. And the last one is you will need to show patience. Because of that, you're going to have to show patience to the people around you. Broken people are going to do broken things. Messy people are sometimes going to be messy. It's just the way it is. And sometimes in a safe environment, you may go 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But if you're going to create a safe environment, you've got to be able to take that journey with them out of a judgment-free, condemnation-free environment and endure in that environment. So you got to be transparent. You got to be vulnerable. You got to show patience if you're going to create a safe environment. The second important part of trust is what I call belonging. You have to feel like you belong. In other words, you are part of something bigger than yourself. That you are part of a tribe. That you are part of a community. You're not alone. You belong to something. That we're all reaching for the same goals and going towards the same direction. We say, is this really a big deal in building trust? And I will tell you this, we don't have a lot of time to camp out on it, but I will tell you this one thing, belonging is the driving force behind every single gang in America. It's the driving force. It is a powerful emotion, the need to belong, because a group of people are willing to join something they know is nefarious, that they know is criminal, that they know is doing the wrong things. But because that group of people makes them feel loved, nurtured, cared for, safe. They feel like they belong, a part of something, they'll go along with it. People have to feel like they belong. In your family, they have to feel like they're a part of something bigger than themselves. In your organization, in your company, they have to feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves if you want to build trusting relationships. And the third one's similar but different. The third one is what I call mattering. They have to matter. More than just I belong to this organization, am I contributing to it? Is the work I'm doing, does it matter? Nobody wants to feel like a cog in the wheel. If you've ever been in a job where you just felt like you were a cog in the wheel, that's not a fun job. You don't get any satisfaction from that or self-worth out of it. Every one of us not only wants to feel like we belong, a part of something big in ourselves, but that the work we're doing is contributing and making a difference and that we matter. And so we have to work hard as parents and as grandparents, as brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles. All of us have to work hard to try to build trusting relationships if we're going to engage conflict in a healthy way. And if we're going to do that, we have to create safe environments. We have to help people understand that they belong, part of something bigger themselves, and that they matter. That they truly, truly matter. And so as I begin to land the plane, this thing gets us to the story. Rather than starting the teaching with the story of today and taking it apart, I wanted to make my case first, and then maybe for some we'll have this aha moment in the story and see it from a different perspective. Because this is a story many of us know. If you've been in church for any length of time, you probably know this story. It's the story of the prodigal son. Now, I could have looked at many different stories. I was thinking about conflict resolution and healthy ways to engage conflict. I mean, right away, the story of Jesus engaging Peter after he denied him 3 times, and he meets him at the Sea of Galilee and reinstates him as a disciple. Great story. And in our small groups, you're going to be engaging that story and talking through some discussion questions about it. For others, maybe we go to Galatians 2. We've done that before as a church, where Paul has to confront Peter for his hypocritical behavior with the Judaizers when they come to Antioch. Another great story. But when I thought of one that truly enveloped all of these ideas of self-awareness and the need for that in conflict resolution and the need to build trust, the story that just kept coming over and over again was the prodigal son. And moms, I'm sorry, I know it's about a dad and it's Mother's Day. I'm sorry. But the Lord just kept putting this one on my heart. If you're not familiar with the story, let me catch us up real quick. Jesus tells a story of a son who goes to his father and he says, "Dad, I want my inheritance early." Which is the equivalent of walking up to your dad and saying, "You're better off dead to me than alive. I wish you were dead." The father gives him his inheritance, and the son goes off and does what many of us figured young sons would do. He squanders it in a foreign country on partying and selfish living and just all sorts of things. But as many of us have learned, the money eventually runs out, doesn't it? And for this young man, it did. The money ran out. And the story tells us that he eventually went to work for another local farmer in this foreign country, tending to his pigs. And he got so hungry and couldn't afford food that he began eating the pig slop for dinner. That's all he could afford. That's all he could do. That's where we pick up the story. And so in Luke chapter 15, verse 17, what we see is this. It says, when he, that's the son, came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and he went to his father." Now notice, I bolded that top line there, when he came to his senses. Do you know what that means? We could very easily substitute that with when he became self-aware. when he had his aha moment, when he finally humbled himself and came to grips with the situation, when he came to his senses. How many of you, if you're in conflict or there's unresolved conflict in your life or things going on, how many of you maybe realize that I have a part to play in this, and I need to become self-aware and come to my senses? I may be contributing to this thing. In verse 20, he continues on. He said, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him. What does it say? He was filled with compassion. He ran to his son. He threw his arms around him and he kissed him. Why did the father do that? I mean, he could have very easily been sitting on the porch. I knew you'd come back. I knew this day was coming. You messed up, didn't you, boy? No. He was filled with compassion. And he ran to him. Why did he run to his son? Because he wanted his son to know before he even spoke a single word, my dear boy, this is a safe place. There's no judgment, no condemnation here. I'm going to let you know before you even get started. You're safe here, son. You're in my arms. I love you. The father knew they had to rebuild trust. And he wanted to know right from the start, my son, you have come to a safe place. And what does his son say to him as it continues? The son says to the father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. And what the son is doing in this situation too is he's also working to build a safe environment. Why? Because sometimes for a safe environment to start, you may need to apologize. You may have to be aware and just say, you know what? I have contributed to this. I'm part of the reason this is happening, and I'm sorry. That's often the start to a safe environment, because if you don't do that, their defenses will still be up. Sometimes a safe environment starts with, my bad. I did this. I own my piece in this. What did the father do after that in verse 22? I love this. The father said to the servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. And he said there, put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Why did he put a ring on his finger? That ring had the insignia of his family. And what he was saying to him is, yes, this is a safe place, son, but you also belong. You are part of something bigger than yourself. You are part of this family. Welcome home. Welcome home. And the story continues. What does the father do next? It says, the father says, bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For the son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And so they began to celebrate. Why? Why did the father do that? Because more than just belonging, the father is looking at his son and is saying, you matter. You matter so much. I'm going to get my choicest meats. I'm going to get my best food, and I'm going to throw a party. You, my son, this is a safe place to come home. You belong to this family, and you matter. You matter to God, and you matter to us. Welcome, welcome home. If we're going to engage conflict in a healthy way, in a biblical way, part of that is becoming self-aware. How am I helping or hurting in this conversation? But another piece of it, as we see from the father, if you're trying to engage someone in a reconciliation process, you will need oftentimes to rebuild trust. And it's not an impossible thing to do, but it is hard work. But part of rebuilding that trust means that you've got to make this a safe place. They have to belong, and they have to know they matter. And so, my dear friends, are there some relationships out there where you say, you know what, as a parent, as a relative, as a boss, I need to do a better job of creating a trusting environment. Maybe I can make it a little safer and be less judgmental and condemning, less shame. Maybe I need to remind this person that you are part of something bigger than yourself, that you're part of a big organization, you're part of a family. And the one I struggle with so often, just encouraging and reminding people you matter, that what you're doing is making a difference, that you're important in our lives, and we love you. Are there relationships you need to take a step back and go, you know what, I think I could do a better job with these 3 areas? And then for the last person, do you need to be able to take a step back, become a little more self-aware, and understand how you may have hurt this relationship, how you may have eroded trust, how your bad habits and behaviors may have been the cause of this? And would you be willing, like the son, to humbly repent and say, I'm sorry? The Father, it's no secret, is a picture of God. For some of you, and we'll end here, the biggest conflict you need to take care of before you can engage your other conflicts is you need to reconcile with God. You need to be able to say, dear Lord, I am a sinner, and my sin separates me from you. You are the son who has taken what the Father has given you, and you've been out squandering it in selfish living. And when you look back at the road you forged in life, it's littered with debris along the way. Are you willing, like the son, to come to the end of yourself and say, maybe I need to go back home to my Father. I'm tired of living this way. And my dear friends, your Father is waiting there, not in judgment. He's not on the porch waiting on you to come home with a scowl on his face. Your Father is there, ready to run to you, embrace you in his arms, and say, welcome home. Welcome to the family. We got work to do. I love you, my dear child of God. My prayer is today you choose to come home to the Father. Let's pray.